Hi creative friends, this is Soraya and thank you so much for being here. So I'm super excited to share the work, the heart, and the vision of a true artistic genius, the one and only Van Gogh. Now I'm just going to say up front that I am going to be a little biased in sharing his story because not only is he one of my all-time favorite artists, but out of all the people in history, my heart goes out to him the most. Now, a lot of people don't understand how revolutionary his art was, and he set the stage for huge art movements that came about in the 20th century, and even a giant like Picasso would not have been possible without Van Gogh. He broke artistic conventions of his time in profound and incalculable ways, because up until then, artists were concerned with realism and technical mastery, whereas Van Gogh was focused on expressing his inner emotional and psychological world. Like, this was truly a revolution. So remember, he painted around 1880s, like that was around the time frame that he was painting, and he only was an artist for 10 short years. He started painting at the age of 27, and then he committed suicide by the time he was 37. So in those 10 years, he created more than 100 works of art, drawings, and he was so prolific that in the last year of his life, he was creating a completed canvas, like a full painting, every roughly 36 hours. He painted 150 canvases just in his last year. So this book over here only covers just a tiny fraction of his work, but I think it's just a good kind of an overview of how he started, and then it also includes some of the like world famous paintings of his that everybody knows and loves. So while I do a flip through here, I am going to talk about what makes his work so unique. So this is one of his earlier paintings. It's called Peasant Woman Sweeping, and he was a very religious person. He actually was a missionary, and at one time in his life before he started painting, he thought he was going to become a preacher. Now, at the time in Europe, religion was used to keep the peasants in line, and so they were told that hard work was doing the Lord's work, and it was glorified, and that's what the upper classes would do, is that they would use religion to keep the peasants in their place. So you can see this in Van Gogh's work because he does kind of glorify the very, very incredibly hard life that people in the late 18th century Europe had to face. And in his earlier works, you don't see as much of the brush strokes that he became famous for, the impasto techniques of applying like really thick paint. You don't see that in these very early works, but even say in 1886, this is like maybe a couple of years after he started painting, you can see over here that what we now would label Van Gogh's brushwork, his style, his way of applying the paint, you can see it in this early work. So this was in 1886 and this one was in 1887. So this is the emergence of the Van Gogh brushstroke. And even over here, I'm going to bring this up closer here, you can see like how he is painting and drawing and depicting his subjects. So he was very, very innovative in his use of color, and he used color symbolically, and he was partial to yellow, which I'll touch on that in a minute. But when it came to the way he approached color, a lot of times he actually used unnatural colors, and what he was trying to do was to convey deep feelings rather than surface accuracy. So what I mean by that is, like, when he's painting this landscape, he wasn't trying to portray it in any kind of an accurate way. He was trying to convey like his inner world. How did he feel looking at this landscape, etc., etc. And this laid the groundwork for later artists to explore form and feeling in radical ways that had not been done before. Now, of course, this is his very, like, the staccato way he would apply paint. And of course, you know, there are art critics and art historians who now say that all of this was due to his psychosis. So obviously he had mental illness, and that could be in the plural, and nobody really knows exactly what he had. It ranges anywhere from saying that he was bipolar, schizophrenic, he did have epilepsy. They now think he had borderline personality disorder, maybe manic depression, etc., etc. So, yeah, like, you know, I don't know if that's true or not. I know that, like, he was partial to yellow, and some art historians say that the reason why that was so is because of his epilepsy medication, and it caused an eye. There is an actual word for it, and I don't remember what it's called, but there is an actual medical term for the epilepsy medication that he was on, that caused his eye to see more yellow than what there was. But then there are other art historians who say no, you know, he was a master colorist, and you know, nobody knows for sure. I think that he was a master colorist. Whether or not the medication had anything to do with it is anybody's guess. Now, this particular painting over here, Women Sitting in the Café du Tamborin, this over here, another artist, Lautrec, he painted the exact same woman in a very similar type of situation. And if you look at the two paintings, you'll see how the two artists approached their subjects in very different ways. Now, she was probably a prostitute, and at that time, a lot of the artists would hire prostitutes to paint and draw, because a woman of, say, you know, like, it's not like now where you can, you know, hire somebody to pose for you and it's not seen as a big deal if a woman poses nude. But at that time, like, respectability was a huge thing, so they would have to hire prostitutes. And everybody, even into the 20th century, Picasso, he hired prostitutes as well, so that was quite common. Now, one of the things I do want to talk about is the way Van Gogh approached portraits. So up until this time, portraits were only done by the very rich. I mean, nobody else could afford to get their portraits done. And then they were shown in the best light possible. So they had all of their best clothing, and they wore silks and jewelry, and their you know, the setting that they were in was just all really regal, etc., etc. Like, if you go to any museum, you're going to see all these portraits, like thousands and thousands and thousands of portraits. And they're, you know, yeah, they're masterfully done, but they don't really, beyond the surface level, they don't tell you anything about the person that the portrait is being, you know, that has been painted. Whereas Van Gogh, with every single brush stroke, he was trying to capture the personality of the person. And he was very highly influenced by Japanese art. You can see there are Japanese prints over here, and in some of his later portraits, he would use Japanese block print in the background. And this one over here, self-portrait, this was done in 1887, and now you can see, like, the brush strokes. You know, this is very, very, very Van Gogh. So he saw art as a personal existential journey. And he wrote over 900 letters to Theo, and in those letters you can see how he used art as a way to explore life, the meaning of life, suffering, beauty, poetry, colors. I mean, it's a treasure trove of information. Now, a few facts about Van Gogh. he only sold one painting during his lifetime. It's called The Red Vineyard, and he sold it for just a pittance. Like, he almost gave it away, honestly. And another fact about him is he only started painting at the age of 27, and then, you know, he died at the age of 37. So he was extremely prolific in his 10 years. And he painted Starry Night from the asylum that he was in, and he did it from memory. It's from the surroundings around the asylum, and I think that they would be allowed to go out during the day. Of course, he would have to be monitored, etc. Now, I want to talk, well, of course, this is a very, very famous painting of his, the Cafe Terrace. But this over here is also revolutionary because it's just a chair and, you know, his pipe and I think a handkerchief. And basically what he's doing is he's conveying the personality of the person by, you know, their belongings and surroundings. And this, it was just not done at the time. Like, he was revolutionary in so many ways. And even this over here, it caused a lot of controversy. And this was like, I think, a bar or maybe a brothel or something like that. But the reason why it caused controversy is because, you know, the colors that he's using are really, they're not natural colors, and the way he's depicting things, like, he's not even trying to be realistic. And up until this point, like, that was the whole purpose of painting, was to to be religious. And like, if you go to the churches, you'll see the church and artists, they work together. And that's how all of the like great Renaissance paintings were done, etc. They're all very religiously based. But also, the more realistically portrayed something was, the more value it was seen to have. And Van Gogh, he just departed from that completely. Now, whether, you know, this was partially due to his psychosis is anybody's guess. And again, he did the same thing. This is Van Gogh's bedroom in Arles, and, you know, he's painting his bedroom, and so you can tell a lot about Van Gogh by just the way he's depicted his bedroom. And so it's kind of like a psychological portrait of a person. And it's just phenomenally forward thinking. Like, that was just not even, like, nobody even conceptualized that up to then. Okay, you guys, I want to talk about sunflowers, okay? So he painted about 22, 23 different versions of sunflowers. And up until this time, there were different reasons why works of art were considered to be valuable, but one of the main reasons was there was only one of it. So let's just take the Mona Lisa, for example, okay? So there's lots of reasons why the Mona Lisa is so, you know, it's so famous, it's so, it's valued at so much, etc., etc. And included in all of those reasons is the fact that there is only one Mona Lisa. There are no replicas, okay? So what Van Gogh did is he said, you know what? No. If something has innate worthiness and value, it doesn't matter. I could paint 100 sunflowers and they are each going to be worth as much as the previous one. Actually, no, they're going to be worth more. And there is a quote of his that I absolutely love, and it says, "If I am worth anything later, I am worth something now. For wheat is wheat, even if people think it is grass in the beginning." And what this speaks of is the innate value and worthiness of a thing. So what he's saying is, how much something is worth has got nothing to do with anything external to it. It has innate intrinsic value. So he painted all of these sunflowers, and that's exactly what happened, because now you have an original in, you know, New York, and another one in Amsterdam, and another one in London, and another one in Tokyo, and each one of them are worth, they're priceless. They are just, you cannot put a value on them. And this was so absolutely revolutionary. And I remember my art professor talking about this I took a full year of art history when I was in university, and she was sharing the story of how he did make a conscious decision and say, no, I am going to paint as many sunflower paintings as I want, and it's not going to lower the value because I've painted more of them. And that's exactly what happened. They actually increased in value. Like, you guys, this is just mind-blowing that he was just a genius. He was just, I mean, I can't even, okay? Now I want to talk about this portrait over here. So like I was saying, for both of these portraits, actually, he's using the block print, Japanese block print for the backgrounds. And, you know, that is, that's also very revolutionary as well. Like, he's combining, say, you know, a European type of way. Well, I shouldn't say this is a European way of painting, because he did depart from that, but he's still combining cultures in a way that later, like artists that came later would do more so of, like, say, Picasso, etc. And so as you can see over here, this was absolutely not the way that portraits were done. A lot of people were highly, highly offended, to the point where, you know, like, I'm sure that he received a lot of hate for the way he did his portraits. Like, they just thought it was so bizarre. Yeah, so these are the cypress trees, and as you can see, I mean, they're just so full of life. And, you know, this is his brushstroke, his masterful use of line and color and form, and the way he actually applied his paint onto the paper. Now, he did also, there are accounts of him eating his paints and turpentine, and I don't know, you know, was that due to his schizophrenia? Some people suggest that, you know, he thought by eating his paints and turpentine, it made him closer to his art. And he did have mental illness, you guys, so, you know, I don't really know. Now this over here, self-portrait with bandaged ear. It is a very, very painful portrait, and, you know, it's right after he cut off a piece of his ear. So let's talk about that incident for a second. So basically, this happened around the time when he invited Gauguin to come and live with him, and he had this idea in his mind that he was going to start a collective of artists. He lived in a yellow house in Arles, and he thought, you know, all these artists can get together and we can you know, create like art and like have an artist collective. And so he was kind of friends with Gauguin, and he invited him to come and live with him for a couple of months, sorry. And basically, you know, it's very sketchy. I mean, not everything is not like 100% accurate, but basically Van Gogh fell in love with a prostitute, and he was trying to impress the prostitute. He kind of thought the prostitute had feelings for him, or there was a possibility that she might have feelings for him. And Gauguin found out about it, and Gauguin, and I'm going to try to not be biased in the telling of this story, but I'm not fond of Gauguin for many reasons, this being one of them. But Gauguin, he just thought the whole thing was hilarious, and he went to, he solicited the prostitute, he slept with her, and then he threw it in Van Gogh's face and told Van Gogh, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then Van Gogh, you know, because, I mean, he did have mental illness, and so he spiraled, and he became really emotional, cut off a piece of his ear and gave it to the prostitute as an offering. Anyways, the whole situation with Van Gogh and Gauguin, it didn't last very long. Gauguin would say that Van Gogh was too needy, he was too emotional, and you guys, he probably was. I mean, he did have a lot of mental illness. So they, you know, just really, everything went south. And then after the couple of months, Gauguin left, and I think Van Gogh was putting more into their so-called friendship. Gauguin was just interested in, you know, spending a couple of months with Van Gogh and then going off to Tahiti or wherever he was going, whereas Van Gogh was looking at it like, oh, you know, we're friends and we're gonna have this artist collective and, you know, blah, blah, blah. So anyways, so this here is a very, very painful portrait, and This is one of the things about Van Gogh that I think makes his work so invaluable and priceless, is because he took everything and laid it out on the canvas. He held nothing back, and he told things in truth. Like he wasn't trying to portray himself other than what he was. He wasn't trying to portray a pretty picture of himself. There, when you look at this portrait, you see a lot of pain. You see his psychosis. You see the depths of his despair. And you know, just the way he's using the brushstrokes, the way he is, just his eyes, the use of his color. He's not trying to paint, he's not trying to paint a pretty picture. He's trying to paint an accurate picture. And this is the heart and the soul of the man, which is why, you know, you cannot put a price on his work. Again, the cypress trees. So you guys, I have told this story, but I'm going to retell it. And this story, again, comes from my art professor. So basically, Dr. Gachet was a very kind doctor at the asylum. Now, you have to look at this as in the late 18th, in the 1800s, you know, and you know, people who had mental illness were not only looked down upon in society, but they were also abused. But this doctor was a very, very kind doctor, and he treated Van Gogh with a lot of respect. So Van Gogh wanted to show his thanks to the good doctor, and he painted this portrait of him. So the doctor did not want to offend Van Gogh, so he accepted the painting and he profusely thanked him. But then when he went home, he did not want to hang up this painting on his wall, because for that time, this painting is like, was considered to be so bizarre and so out of the realms of, you know, what would be considered acceptable. He took the painting and he went to his chicken coop and he tacked it up in his chicken coop. And, you know, decades later, his grandson or his great grandson ended up finding this original Van Gogh painting tacked to the chicken coop, one of the walls. Yeah. And, you know, yeah, that is a very, very interesting story. So this over here is a self-portrait at the Musée d'Orsay, and I was so fortunate to see it in real life, and there's absolutely nothing that can describe the sheer beauty and sorrow and magnificence of this piece of art. I just stood there and I was just bawling my eyes out. And that is what he did. He was able to take all of his pain, his joy, his sadness, the beauty, the poetry of life, and he was able to just lay it out bare on the canvas. And it's right there. It's alive. And when you're standing in front of his paintings, you absolutely see the genius of this man. And I just want to point out that one of the biggest reasons why we even are able to have all these paintings of Van Gogh is because his brother Theo supported him throughout his life, not only financially, but also, you know, emotionally and mentally. They were really, really good friends. And all the letters to Theo, they tell of a very solid friendship and love, a deep, deep love. And another person that made all of this possible is Van Gogh's sister-in-law, Joanna, because she did not get mad at her husband, Theo, for financially supporting Van Gogh, even though they could not afford it. They were not rich. But she, you know, totally supported Van Gogh as well. And upon Van Gogh's death, and even after Theo died, it was Joanna who bundled up all of his letters and, you know, really preserved his artworks. And she saw the genius and the beauty of his work. And some of it was also just practicality, because she was left with a young child. And, you know, it was her way of supporting herself financially as well. But she throughout, you know, Theo's life and Van Gogh's life, she supported the work. So I just want to point that out. And as we all know, this here is Crows in the Wheat Field, and Some people say that it is a prediction of his death, because he did go into the wheat field, into this wheat field actually, and you know, he killed himself. It was an ugly death. It took him about 3 or 4 days to die, and just a very, very sad end to a brilliant genius of a man. And I think one of the things I so wish is that we could go back in time and tell Van Gogh how deeply loved he is, how beloved he is, how much his art means to so many of us. Because he did struggle with that. There were glimpses when he knew his worth and he knew the value of what he was creating, but there were a lot of other times when he just suffered and struggled with knowing how brilliant of an artist and a person he was. Anyways, you guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.